Hello there, and welcome to another episode of Sleep Theories. Before we dive into tonight's tale, I hope you're having a wonderful day, wherever you are in the world, whether it's morning coffee time in Seattle, afternoon tea in London, or perhaps you're winding down for the evening in Sydney. Thank you for joining us. If you're new to our channel, please consider subscribing to Sleep Theories for more mysterious stories and unexplained phenomena that will keep you wondering long into the night. Now, settle in as we explore one of America's greatest mysteries through a lens you've never seen before. This is the story of Roanoke, not as history taught you, but as it really happened. The basement of the Wilmington Maritime Museum smelled of salt and old wood, a perpetual reminder of its proximity to the North Carolina coast. Ellis Vane had been working there for 3 years, cataloguing donations and managing the archives when the renovation crew found it wedged behind a false wall that had probably stood for decades. The chest was small, maybe 2 feet long and a foot wide, crafted from what appeared to be Spanish cedar and bound with iron that had somehow resisted the worst of time's corrosion. The museum director, Dr. Sarah Chen, had called Ellis down specifically because of his background in colonial history and his reputation for careful restoration work. Nobody knows how long it's been down here, Dr. Chen explained, running her hand along the chest's surface. The construction crew says the wall they removed was built sometime in the 1940s, but this chest is obviously much older. Ellis knelt beside it, examining the craftsmanship. The wood grain was tight and the joinery precise, suggesting European construction from perhaps the late 16th or early 17th century. What struck him most were the symbols carved into the lid. Not any recognisable European heraldry, but something that seemed to blend Spanish maritime markings with what looked almost like Native American pictographs. "Have you opened it yet?" he asked. "We wanted you here first. Your expertise with period documents could be invaluable if there's anything fragile inside." The lock had long since corroded away, leaving only the latch mechanism. Ellis carefully worked it free with a small tool, mindful that whatever was inside had been sealed away for centuries. The lid opened with a creak that seemed to echo through the basement stone walls. Inside, wrapped in what appeared to be oiled leather that had somehow maintained its integrity, was a bound journal. Beneath it lay several rolled documents that looked like maps or charts, and scattered throughout were small objects. A compass, a few coins, and what appeared to be carved wooden tokens bearing more of those strange symbols. Ellis lifted the journal with gloved hands. The leather binding was dark with age but intact, and embossed on the cover in faded gold lettering were the initials M.A. and the year 1591. 1591, Dr. Chen breathed. That's just 4 years after the Roanoke colony was established. Ellis opened the journal carefully. The pages were yellowed but legible, covered in tight handwriting in what appeared to be Spanish, though mixed with Latin phrases and occasional words in what might have been Portuguese or Italian. But it was the first page that made his hands tremble slightly as he read. "What does it say?" Dr. Chen asked. Ellis cleared his throat and began to translate. "My name is Mateo Alvarez, cartographer in the service of the Crown of Spain, though my loyalty lies with a higher authority than any earthly king. I write this account in the year of our Lord 1591, 4 years after I witnessed events on the island called Roanoke that will haunt me until my death. What happened to the English colony? There was no mystery, no tragedy of starvation or disease or savage attack. It was planned, it was necessary, and God forgive us all, it was successful." Dr. Chen stared at him. "That's impossible. The Spanish weren't at Roanoke. And what does he mean it was planned?" Ellis continued reading silently, his eyes widening with each line. According to Alvarez, he hadn't been Spanish at all during his time at Roanoke, but had posed as a Portuguese sailor who had joined the English expedition. His real mission, assigned by what he called the Order of the Sealed Door, was to monitor reports of strange phenomena around the island and, if necessary, ensure that certain discoveries never reached European shores. "Dr. Chen," Ellis said quietly, "I think we need to read this entire journal before we tell anyone else about it." Ellis spent the next week translating Alvarez's journal, working late into the night in his small apartment overlooking the Cape Fear River. What he found challenged everything he thought he knew about the lost colony of Roanoke. According to Alvarez's account, he had been recruited by a secretive organisation that operated across national boundaries, with members embedded in the Vatican, the Spanish court, and even the court of Queen Elizabeth. The Order of the Sealed Door, as they called themselves, had existed for centuries with one primary mission: to monitor and contain what they referred to as thin places, locations where the barrier between worlds grew dangerously weak. I was approached in Seville in the spring of 1586, Alvarez wrote, by a man who knew things about my family, my education, and my past service that no stranger should have known. He told me that the English colony being planned for the island they called Roanoke was located at one of these thin places, and that if the colonists were allowed to remain there, they might discover things that would threaten the very fabric of reality itself. The Order had intelligence suggesting that local Native American tribes had long avoided the island for spiritual reasons, calling it Okanaho in their language, a word Alvarez translated as "where the sky walks." The area was said to be prone to strange weather, unusual animal behaviour, and what the natives described as walking dreams, visions so vivid they could not be distinguished from reality. Alvarez's mission was to join the colony as a Portuguese sailor who had supposedly been shipwrecked and rescued by an English vessel. His Portuguese identity would explain any accent or linguistic peculiarities, while his cartographic skills would make him valuable enough to the colonists that they would accept him without too many questions. I arrived with the second supply mission in 1587, he wrote, and found the colonists already troubled by strange occurrences. Governor White's own daughter, Eleanor Dare, had given birth to a child who would not stop crying during the dark of the moon, but who seemed unnaturally calm during the full moon. The colonists reported shared dreams of vast cities beneath the waves and forests that stretched beyond the horizon. Their compasses would spin wildly in certain parts of the island, and they had begun finding footprints in the sand that belonged to no known animal. The Native Americans who traded with the colony, primarily members of the Croatan tribe, had become increasingly reluctant to visit the island. Through careful questioning, Alvarez learned that their elders spoke of Roanoke as a place where the ancestors walked too close to the living, and where the boundary between the world of the dead and the world of the living had grown thin. But most disturbing to Alvarez was the behaviour of the colonists themselves. Within months of his arrival, he observed that they had begun experiencing what he described as collective visions, shared dreams and waking hallucinations that seemed to be centred around a particular grove of trees in the island's interior. There was a man among them, Alvarez wrote, a builder from Cornwall named Jonas Bray, who had taken to spending long hours in that grove. He claimed the trees spoke to him in a language older than Latin, older than Greek, older than any tongue spoken by living men. The other colonists began to follow him there, and I noticed that they would return from these visits changed, quieter, more distant, but also strangely purposeful, as if they had been given knowledge that the rest of us were not meant to share. Governor White, according to Alvarez, had grown increasingly concerned about the colony's isolation and the dwindling supplies. His decision to return to England for help was made, Alvarez suggested, not just because of practical concerns, but because he had begun to sense that something was fundamentally wrong with the island itself. White confided in me before his departure, Alvarez wrote, that he had begun to doubt his own senses. He claimed to see lights in the forest at night where no fires were burning, and to hear voices calling his name in languages he did not recognise. He said the very air of the island felt different, thicker somehow, as if it contained more than mere breath. After White's departure, Jonas Bray had effectively taken control of the colony. Under his leadership, the colonists had begun what Alvarez described as preparations for a great journey, though where they intended to go and how they planned to get there remained unclear. Bray spoke often of the door in the forest, Alvarez wrote, and claimed that the native warnings about the island were not meant to keep people away, but to prepare them for what he called the crossing. He said the thin place was not a danger to be avoided, but an opportunity to be embraced, a chance to step beyond the limitations of the mortal world into something greater. The journal entries from this period became increasingly frantic. Alvarez described colonists carving symbols into trees, not just the word Croatoan that history remembered, but complex geometric patterns that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. He wrote of finding footprints in the sand that led directly into the ocean and continued beneath the waves, as if the walker had not noticed the transition from land to sea. Most troubling of all were the children. According to Alvarez, they had begun speaking in unison, reciting words in that unknown language that Jonah Spray claimed to understand. Little Virginia Dare, Eleanor's infant daughter, had stopped crying entirely and would stare at empty spaces with an intensity that unnerved even her mother. I began to understand, Alvarez wrote, that my mission for the Order might require actions I had not anticipated. The colonists were not simply in danger of discovering something dangerous, they were becoming something dangerous themselves. As autumn arrived in 1587, Alvarez documented increasingly strange phenomena around the Roanoke settlement. The journal entries from this period were filled with detailed observations that read more like a naturalist's field notes than a spy's report. The wildlife has begun to behave in ways that defy natural explanation, he wrote. Birds that should have migrated south remain on the island, but they no longer sing. Instead, they gather in perfect circles around certain trees and remain motionless for hours at a time. Fish wash ashore in vast numbers, not dead but seemingly sleeping, their gills moving but their eyes staring at nothing. The colonists have taken to eating them, claiming they taste of strange spices and leave them feeling unusually alert. The geometric symbols that the colonists had begun carving were spreading throughout the settlement. What had started with Jonah Spray making small marks on trees had evolved into an elaborate system of interconnected patterns that covered virtually every wooden surface in the colony. Alvarez attempted to copy these symbols in his journal, noting that they seemed to follow mathematical principles he didn't understand. The patterns appear random at first glance, he wrote, but there is clearly an underlying structure. Spray claims they are not decorative but functional, a form of writing that transcends language because it speaks directly to what he calls the deeper mind. When I stare at them for too long, I begin to feel dizzy, and I have noticed that my dreams on those nights are unusually vivid and often feature places I have never seen. The colonists' behaviour had become increasingly synchronised. They would wake at the same time each morning, often before dawn, and gather in the central square without any apparent signal or coordination. They would stand in silence for several minutes, then disperse to their daily tasks with an efficiency that seemed almost mechanical. It is as if they share a single mind, Alvarez observed. They speak less to each other now, but they seem to understand each other perfectly. When one begins a task, others will join without being asked, bringing exactly the tools or materials needed. They work with a precision that would be admirable if it were not so unnatural. The native Croatan people had stopped visiting the island entirely by this time, but Alvarez managed to meet with some of them on the mainland. Through careful questioning and what trade goods he could spare, he learned more about their beliefs regarding Roanoke. An elderly Croatan shaman named Wanchese agreed to speak with him, though only after Alvarez had submitted to a purification ritual involving smoke from burning sage and cedar. He told me that his people's name for the island translated more accurately as the place where dreams leak through, Alvarez wrote. According to their oral traditions, Roanoke had always been a site where the spirits of the dead could communicate with the living, but in recent years something had changed. The dead were no longer content to merely speak, they wanted to cross over entirely. Wanchese explained that his people's shamans had long used the island for vision quests, but they had always followed strict protocols to ensure that what they encountered there remained on the spiritual plane. The English colonists, lacking this knowledge and these protections, had unknowingly opened doorways that should have remained closed. The old man drew symbols in the sand as he spoke, Alvarez recorded, and I was shocked to recognise them as identical to the ones the colonists had been carving. When I pointed this out, his face went pale, and he immediately began rubbing out the marks he had made. He told me that those symbols should never be created by the uninitiated, as they were not mere representations but actual keys, and once carved, they could not be uncarved. According to Wanchese, the island sat at the convergence of several spiritual energy lines that his people called the Great Web. Most of the time, these lines carried only the normal flow of spiritual energy that connected all living things. But at certain times, particularly during specific astronomical alignments, the energy would intensify, creating what he called thin times, when the barrier between worlds became permeable. The English have built their settlement directly over the heart of the convergence, Alvarez wrote. Wanchisi told me that this was like building a house on top of a door that was meant to remain closed. The spirits that dwell on the other side are pressing against that door, and the colonists' presence there is weakening the locks that hold it shut. The shaman also revealed that the strange language the colonists had begun speaking was not human in origin. It was what his people called the first tongue, the language spoken by the spirits that existed before the physical world was created. According to Croatan belief, this language had the power to reshape reality itself, but only beings who existed primarily in the spiritual realm were meant to use it. When humans speak the first tongue, Wanchisi warned through an interpreter, they begin to become less human and more spirit. This is why the colonists' behaviour has changed. They are slowly transforming into something that can exist on both sides of the door. Alvarez became increasingly concerned about his own safety as he realised the implications of what he was learning. If the Order of the Sealed Door had sent him to monitor the situation, they clearly believed that intervention might be necessary. But what form would that intervention take, and would he be expected to survive it? His answer came in a coded message delivered by a Croatan runner who claimed to have received it from a Portuguese trader on the mainland. The message, when decoded using a cipher known only to Order members, was brief and chilling. The door must be sealed from both sides. Ensure no witnesses remain. Your sacrifice will be remembered. The final entries in Alvarez's journal were dated in late 1590, nearly 3 years after Governor White's departure. The handwriting became increasingly erratic, and several pages appeared to have been torn out entirely. What remained painted a picture of a community that had become something far removed from the English colony it had once been. They no longer eat food as other men do, Alvarez wrote. I have watched them consume things that should be inedible. Raw bark, stones, seawater, and they show no ill effects. Indeed, they seem to draw nourishment from these substances in ways that defy understanding. When I questioned Eleanor Dare about this, she looked at me with eyes that seemed far older than her years and said, "We are learning to subsist on what the other place provides." The colonists had constructed additional buildings, but not in any architectural style that Alvarez recognised. The structures seemed to follow the same geometric principles as the symbols they had been carving, with walls that met at impossible angles, and rooms that appeared larger on the inside than the outside. When Alvarez attempted to map these buildings, he found that his drawings would change overnight, as if the structures themselves were fluid. "I begin to suspect that I am losing my mind," he wrote. "Yesterday I watched Jonas Bray walk through what appeared to be a solid wall, yet when I approached the same spot, I found only oak planks. When I mentioned this to another colonist, she nodded as if this were perfectly normal, and said, 'The walls are suggestions now. We are learning to see beyond them.'" The children had become the most unsettling aspect of the transformed colony. Little Virginia Dare, now 3 years old, would spend hours staring at empty air and conducting elaborate conversations with invisible companions. Other children would join her, and together they would play games that seemed to follow rules only they understood. "I observed them today drawing pictures in the sand," Alvarez recorded. "The images they created were of places I have never seen. Vast cities with spires that twisted like smoke. Forests where the trees grew downward from the sky. Oceans that flowed upward in waterfalls that reached beyond the clouds." When I asked Virginia what she was drawing, she looked at me with genuine confusion and said, "The places we're going to visit tomorrow." The final sequence of events began on what Alvarez calculated was October 31st, 1590, though he noted that his attempts to keep track of time had become increasingly difficult. "The days and nights no longer follow natural patterns," he wrote. "Sometimes the sun will set and rise again within what feels like hours. Other times, A single night will stretch on for what seems like days. The colonists appear untroubled by this, but it has made my record-keeping nearly impossible. On that final night, Alvarez was awakened by what he described as a sound like singing, but in harmonies that human voices should not be able to produce. He emerged from his shelter to find the entire colony gathered in the central square, standing in the complex geometric pattern they had carved into the ground. They were not merely standing in the pattern, he wrote. They were part of it. Their positions corresponded to specific symbols, and as they moved slowly around the square, the pattern itself seemed to pulse with a faint light that came from no visible source. Jonas Bray stood at the centre of the formation, holding little Virginia Dare in his arms. The child was no longer crying or speaking, but her eyes were open and alert, reflecting a light that seemed to come from within. Bray began to speak in the first tongue, Alvarez recorded, and as he did, the air itself began to change. It became thicker, more substantial, as if it were taking on properties more like water than gas. The other colonists joined their voices to his, and the harmony they created was unlike anything I have ever heard, beautiful and terrible at the same time. As the chanting continued, Alvarez noticed that the forest around the colony was beginning to glow with the same faint light he had seen emanating from the carved patterns. Trees that had stood for centuries began to sway without any wind, and he could hear what sounded like footsteps approaching from all directions, though he could see no one walking. The boundary was dissolving, he wrote. I could sense it happening, though I cannot explain how. The physical world and what Bray called the other place were merging, and the colonists were serving as anchors for the process. They were not disappearing. They were helping their world disappear into something else. One by one, the colonists began to walk toward the forest. They moved with purpose but without haste, as if they were simply going home after a long day's work. As each person crossed the tree line, they seemed to fade slightly, becoming translucent before vanishing entirely. I wanted to call out to them, to warn them, but I found that I could not speak, Alvarez wrote. It was as if the air had become too thick to carry sound, or perhaps my voice was no longer connected to this reality. I could only watch as my companions walked into a forest that was no longer entirely of this world. Eleanor Dare was among the last to go. Before she crossed into the trees, she turned back toward Alvarez and spoke words that he was somehow able to hear, despite the supernatural silence that had fallen over the island. "We are not lost," she said. "We are found. Tell those who come after us that we chose this path willingly, and that the door we have opened will remain open for those who are ready to walk through it." Jonas Bray was the final colonist to enter the forest. Before he disappeared, he carved one last symbol into a prominent tree, not Croatoan, as history would remember, but something far more complex. As he finished the carving, he looked directly at Alvarez and spoke in English for the first time in months. "You must choose now, Mateo," he said. "Come with us to the other place, or return to your masters and tell them that their seal has been broken. But know that what we have begun here cannot be undone." Alvarez chose to flee. He spent the remainder of that impossible night gathering what supplies he could carry and preparing the small boat he had hidden on the island's far shore. As dawn broke, though he noted that the sun rose in the west rather than the east, he pushed off from Roanoke Island for the last time. "I have failed in my mission," he wrote in what appeared to be his final entry. "The order sent me to prevent a catastrophe, but I fear I have only witnessed the beginning of something far greater than any of us understood. The colonists have not vanished. They have transformed, and the door they have opened between worlds will not remain closed for long." Ellis Vane spent weeks researching Mateo Alvarez, finding scattered references to Spanish cartographers of the period, but nothing that could definitively confirm or deny the journal's authenticity. The paper and ink appeared to be period appropriate when examined under the museum's basic equipment, but Ellis knew that a thorough authentication would require resources the Wilmington Maritime Museum didn't possess. What troubled him most were the details in Alvarez's account that didn't match the accepted historical narrative. According to the journal, the word Croatoan carved into the tree had been a later addition, created by Alvarez himself as a misdirection to hide the more complex symbol that Jonas Bray had actually carved. The true message left by the colonists was not a desperate plea for help. but a warning about what they had discovered and where they had gone. Ellis attempted to publish preliminary findings about the journal in several historical journals, but each submission was rejected with unusually curt responses. The Journal of Colonial American History didn't even bother with a formal rejection letter, simply returning his manuscript with a handwritten note that read, "Not suitable for publication." It was after his third rejection that Ellis received an unexpected visitor at the museum. Captain Roderick Lisle, retired from what he claimed was government service, appeared one afternoon without an appointment and asked to speak privately about Ellis's research. Lisle was a tall, weathered man in his 60s who carried himself with military bearing. He examined the Alvarez journal with the practiced eye of someone who had seen similar documents before, though he offered no comment on its authenticity. "Mr. Vane," Lisle said finally, "I'm going to give you some advice that you would be wise to take. Some historical mysteries are left unsolved for very good reasons. The Roanoke colony is one of them." "What do you mean?" Ellis asked. "Are you saying this journal is genuine?" "I'm saying that there are aspects of American colonial history that remain classified at levels far above your security clearance or mine. The official story of the lost colony serves important purposes, and alternative theories, regardless of their supporting evidence, are not in the public interest." Lisle explained that he had spent 30 years working for what he called various agencies that monitored and contained information deemed too sensitive for public consumption. While he couldn't provide specifics, he assured Ellis that the Roanoke incident was far from the only historical event that had been deliberately obscured or reframed. "The world is a more fragile place than most people realize," Lisle said. "There are phenomena that exist at the edges of human understanding, and exposure to these phenomena can have consequences that extend far beyond academic curiosity. Sometimes the truth is classified not to hide government incompetence or wrongdoing, but to protect people from knowledge they're not equipped to handle." When Ellis pressed for more details, Lisle became evasive. He would only say that the area around Roanoke Island had been under informal monitoring for centuries, and that unusual incidents continued to occur there with disturbing regularity. "Every few years, someone disappears on or near that island under circumstances that can't be easily explained," Lisle revealed. "Experienced fishermen who know those waters like their own backyard suddenly lose their way and are never seen again. Researchers studying the historical site report equipment malfunctions, shared hallucinations, and time distortions. The Coast Guard maintains detailed files on these incidents, but they're not available to the public." Lisle's final advice was clear. Ellis should lock the journal away and focus his research on safer historical topics. When Ellis asked what would happen if he refused, Lisle's response was diplomatically threatening. "Nothing dramatic," Lisle said. "You'll simply find that funding for your research dries up, that your academic reputation suffers from a series of unfortunate misunderstandings, and that opportunities in your field become increasingly scarce. These things happen in academia all the time, of course, but they tend to happen more frequently to people who ask the wrong questions." After Lisle left, Ellis spent several days considering his options. The rational choice was clearly to follow the retired officer's advice and abandon his research into the Alvarez journal. But the historian in him couldn't accept that such an important discovery should be suppressed simply because it challenged accepted narratives. Instead, Ellis decided to organize a small, unofficial expedition to Roanoke Island. If Alvarez's account was accurate, there should be physical evidence on the island that could corroborate his claims. The geometric symbols carved into trees, the unusual building foundations, perhaps even traces of the complex pattern that the colonists had created in their central square. Ellis recruited 2 companions for the expedition: Dr. Sarah Chen from the museum, whose expertise in maritime archaeology would be valuable, and Marcus Webb, a graduate student in anthropology who had written his thesis on Native American spiritual beliefs in the Carolina coastal region. They planned the trip carefully, obtaining all necessary permits for archaeological research on the island, and scheduling their visit during a period when tourism would be minimal. Ellis deliberately avoided mentioning the Alvarez journal in their permit applications, describing their mission as a routine survey of known colonial sites. The team arrived at Roanoke Island on a grey October morning that reminded Ellis uncomfortably of Alvarez's description of that final day in 1590. The island felt different from other historical sites Ellis had visited, not just isolated, but somehow separate from the normal flow of time and space. "The air feels thick here," Dr. Chen observed as they made their way inland from the dock. "Almost humid, but not quite. It's like breathing through water." Marcus had brought several pieces of equipment designed to detect electromagnetic anomalies, based on his research into locations that Native American tribes had considered spiritually significant. Within minutes of beginning their survey, his instruments began registering readings that he described as impossible. "According to these devices," Marcus said, "we're standing in the middle of a massive electromagnetic field that's fluctuating in regular patterns. It's almost like a heartbeat, but the frequency is wrong for any natural phenomenon I know of." They found the site of the original Rowan Oak colony easily enough. It had been excavated and marked by previous archaeological teams. But as they began their own careful survey of the area, they discovered features that had apparently been overlooked or ignored by earlier researchers. The foundations of several buildings were indeed laid out in geometric patterns that matched the symbols Ellis had copied from Alvarez's journal. Trees throughout the area bore carvings that were far more complex than the simple Croa tone that had made it into the history books. And in the centre of what had been the colony's main square, careful excavation revealed a circular pattern of stones that corresponded exactly to Alvarez's description of the formation the colonists had used for their final ritual. But most disturbing of all were the fresh carvings they found, symbols identical to those described in the 400-year-old journal, but clearly made within the past few months. "Someone's been here recently," Dr. Chen said, running her fingers over marks in a tree that was still weeping sap. "These carvings are maybe 3 or 4 months old at most." As they documented their findings, Ellis began to notice that the island's wildlife was behaving strangely. Birds that should have been migrating south lingered in unnatural formations, and fish could be seen moving in perfect circles just offshore. The team's electronic equipment began malfunctioning in ways that Marcus described as selectively impossible. Compasses would spin wildly in certain areas, but work perfectly a few feet away, and their cameras would produce images that showed details not visible to the naked eye. That evening, as they set up camp near the historical site, Ellis made a discovery that chilled him to the bone. While reviewing the digital photographs they had taken throughout the day, he noticed that several images showed human figures standing among the trees, figures that none of them remembered seeing while taking the pictures. The figures appeared translucent and were dressed in clothing that looked distinctly Elizabethan. In one photograph, Ellis could clearly make out a woman holding a small child, both of them staring directly at the camera with expressions of urgent warning. "We're not alone on this island," Ellis told his companions, "and I don't think we ever were." The team's first night on Roanoke Island passed without incident, but Ellis noticed that all 3 of them reported unusually vivid dreams, featuring the same basic elements: vast cities beneath the ocean, forests where the trees grew in impossible directions, and a sense of being called towards something just beyond the edge of perception. "It's like the island is trying to show us something," Dr. Chen said over breakfast. "In my dream, I was standing in a place that looked exactly like this clearing, but it was filled with buildings I've never seen before. The architecture was human, but it followed principles that don't exist in our world." Marcus had experienced something similar, but his dream had focused on the Native American perspective of the island. He had found himself in conversation with shamans who explained that Roanoke was not unique. There were dozens of such thin places scattered across the continent, most of them carefully avoided or guarded by indigenous peoples who understood their true nature. "They told me that the Europeans weren't the first outsiders to stumble onto one of these sites," Marcus said. "According to the dream, there have been incidents throughout history where groups of people have vanished after encountering these dimensional weak points. The difference with Roanoke was that it was the first time anyone had tried to establish a permanent settlement directly on top of one." Ellis shared his own dream, which had been centered around Mateo Alvarez himself. In the dream, the Spanish cartographer had not fled the island as his journal claimed, but had remained to serve as a guardian, warning away those who were not prepared for what they might find. "He told me that the journal was only part of the truth," Ellis said. "He stayed on the island to watch over the crossing point, and he's been doing so for over 400 years. According to the dream, He was the one who's been making the fresh carvings we found, not to summon whatever exists on the other side, but to maintain the seals that keep it from crossing over uninvited. As they prepared to continue their survey of the island, Marcus's electromagnetic detection equipment began registering readings that were off the scale. The regular patterns they had observed the previous day were intensifying, and the frequency was increasing toward what he described as a resonance point. "If I didn't know better," Marcus said, "I'd say the island is building towards something. These energy patterns are definitely artificial, and they're following the same geometric principles we've been seeing in the carvings." They decided to focus their exploration on the island's interior, where Alvarez had described the grove of trees that Jonas Bray had claimed spoke to him in the first tongue. The area was not difficult to find. It stood out from the surrounding forest like a cathedral, with ancient oaks arranged in perfect circles around a central clearing. The trees in the grove bore carvings that were far more elaborate than anything they had found near the colonial site. The symbols here seemed to shift and change depending on the angle from which they were viewed, and staring at them for too long produced the same dizzying effect that Alvarez had described in his journal. In the centre of the grove they found what appeared to be a natural stone formation that had been carved into a perfect spiral. The spiral descended into the earth for at least 10 feet before disappearing into darkness, and the electromagnetic readings from Marcus's equipment were strongest at its edge. "This is it," Ellis said. "This has to be what Alvarez called the door in the forest. But it doesn't look like it leads to another place. It looks like it goes down." Dr. Chen rappelled into the spiral to investigate, reporting that the carved passage continued far deeper than their equipment could illuminate. More disturbing, she found that the walls were covered with symbols that appeared to have been carved from the inside, as if someone had been working their way up from the depths below. "There are fresh tool marks down here," she called up to them. "Someone has been maintaining these carvings recently, but I can't see how they would have accessed this area. There's no other entrance that I can find." As Dr. Chen climbed back to the surface, Marcus noticed that his equipment was detecting movement in the electromagnetic field around the grove. The patterns that had been regular and predictable were becoming chaotic, as if something was disturbing them from below. "We need to leave," Marcus said urgently. "Whatever this place is, our presence here is affecting it. The energy patterns are destabilizing, and I'm reading massive fluctuations that could indicate... I'm not sure what they could indicate, but it's nothing good." But as they tried to leave the grove, they found that the trees seemed to have shifted position slightly, blocking the paths they had used to enter. The symbols carved into the bark were glowing with the same faint light that Alvarez had described, and the air had taken on the thick, substantial quality that made breathing feel like swimming through invisible water. "The barrier is thinning," Ellis realised, "just like it did in 1590. We've triggered the same process that the colonists experienced." Dr. Chen was the first to hear the voices. She stopped walking and tilted her head, listening to something that the others couldn't yet perceive. "Someone's calling my name," she said. "It sounds like my grandmother, but she's been dead for 15 years. Marcus heard them next, voices speaking in what he recognised as several different Native American languages, all calling to him simultaneously. The words were different, but the message was the same. "Come home. Come back to where you belong." Ellis felt a growing sense of inevitability as he listened to the voices that were now reaching him as well. They spoke in Spanish, in English, in Latin, and in languages he didn't recognise but somehow understood. All of them were offering the same invitation that Jonas Bray had extended to the colonists 4 centuries earlier. "We have to resist," Ellis said, though he wasn't sure he wanted to. The voices were beautiful, and the places they described sounded far more appealing than the mundane world he had left behind. This is how it happened before. This is how they convinced the colonists to cross over. But even as he spoke, Ellis could see that his companions were already changing. Dr. Chen's eyes had taken on the same distant, purposeful expression that Alvarez had described in the colonists. Marcus was moving with an unnatural precision, as if he were following choreographed steps in a dance only he could hear. The electromagnetic readings on Marcus's equipment were now completely chaotic, with the needle swinging wildly across the scale. But Marcus himself seemed unconcerned. setting the device aside as if it were no longer relevant. "The instruments can't measure what's happening here," he said, his voice carrying an odd harmonic quality. "We're moving beyond the realm where such things matter." Through the trees around the grove, Ellis could see figures moving, translucent at first, but becoming more solid with each passing moment. He recognised Ellen Adair and little Virginia, now a grown woman, but still carrying the otherworldly presence she had possessed as a child. Jonas Bray was there as well, looking exactly as he had 4 centuries ago, beckoning them forward with a smile that was both welcoming and terrifying. And standing slightly apart from the colonists was Mateo Alvarez himself, no longer the frightened spy who had fled the island in 1590, but something transformed and eternal. He approached Ellis directly, speaking in accented English. "You have read my journal," Alvarez said. "You know what happened here, but you do not yet understand what is happening now." "Are you going to stop us from leaving?" Ellis asked. "Like you were supposed to stop the colonists?" Alvarez shook his head. "I was never meant to stop them. The Order of the Sealed Door understood far less than they believed. This place was never a threat to be contained. It is an opportunity to be embraced, but only by those who are ready." He explained that the thin places scattered across the world were not weaknesses in reality, but doorways to a broader understanding of existence. The colonists had not been destroyed or corrupted. They had evolved beyond the limitations of a single-dimensional plane. "Your world is ending," Alvarez continued. "Not today, not tomorrow, but within the span of a few human lifetimes. Climate change, war, the collapse of the systems that sustain billions of people. These are not problems that can be solved from within the current paradigm. But there are other ways to exist, other places where humanity can continue to grow and learn." Dr. Chen had moved closer to the spiral carved into the stone, and Ellis could see that she was preparing to descend into its depths. "Sarah," he called to her, "you don't have to do this." She turned back to him with a smile that was both sad and infinitely compassionate. "Ellis, I've spent my entire career studying the past, trying to understand how our ancestors lived and died. This is a chance to understand how they transcended both life and death. How can I pass that up?" Marcus was already walking toward the forest, following paths that seemed to open before him as he moved. The Native American voices were growing stronger, and Ellis could see that they belonged to figures who looked exactly like the shamans from his dreams. "They're calling me home," Marcus said. "My people have been guardians of these places for thousands of years. It's time for me to take my place among them." Ellis found himself alone with Alvarez as his companions disappeared into the transformed landscape around them. The Spanish cartographer placed a hand on his shoulder, and Ellis felt a sudden rush of knowledge and understanding. He saw the truth about the Order of the Sealed Door. It had not been created to prevent people from crossing over, but to ensure that only the right people made the journey. The organisation had spent centuries identifying and testing individuals who might be capable of surviving the transition between worlds. He saw the broader network of thin places around the globe, each one serving as a potential refuge for humanity as the current world system collapsed. Some led to worlds of pure spirit, others to dimensions where the laws of physics operated according to different principles, and still others to timelines where human civilization had developed along entirely different paths. And he saw his own role in the process, not as a historian documenting the past, but as a guide helping to prepare others for the future. "The choice is yours," Alvarez said. "You can return to your world and continue living as you have, knowing what you now know but unable to act on that knowledge. Or you can join us in the work of preparing for what comes next." Ellis looked around the grove one final time. The electromagnetic disturbances had stabilized into patterns of incredible beauty and complexity. The carved symbols on the trees were now clearly visible as maps showing the connections between different dimensional planes. And through the forest, he could see cities and landscapes that belonged to no earthly geography. He thought about Captain Lyle's warning about knowledge that humanity wasn't equipped to handle, and realised that the retired officer had been both right and wrong. Most people weren't ready for this knowledge, but some were, and it was those few who would serve as bridges between the world that was ending and the worlds that were waiting to be born. Ellis pulled out his phone and began recording a final message, though he wasn't sure anyone would ever hear it or believe it if they did. "My name is Ellis Vane," he said. "I came to Roanoke Island to investigate a 400-year-old mystery, and I found something far more important than I was looking for. The lost colony was never lost. They found their way to places that most people can't even imagine, and now those places are calling to us again." He described what he had learned about the thin places, about the order of the sealed door, and about the choice that faced humanity as the current world system approached its inevitable collapse. "If you find this recording," he concluded, "know that there are other ways to exist, other places where consciousness can flourish, even when the physical world fails. The door is opening again, and it will remain open for those who are ready to walk through it." Ellis ended the recording and set the phone on the carved stone spiral where someone might eventually find it. Then he turned to Alvarez and nodded. "I'm ready," he said. Together they walked into the forest that was no longer entirely of this world, following paths that led beyond the boundaries of space and time into possibilities that had no names in any human language. Behind them, the grove fell silent except for the whisper of wind through leaves that might have been real or might have been memory. The electromagnetic disturbances faded to normal levels, and the carved symbols returned to their dormant state, waiting for the next group of seekers who would be drawn to the island by forces they couldn't understand but couldn't resist. The mystery of Roanoke remained unsolved in the official records, just as Captain Lyle and his unnamed agencies preferred. But for those who knew where to look and what to listen for, the truth was always there, carved into trees and stones and whispered by voices that spoke in languages older than human civilization. The colonists had not vanished. They had simply moved beyond the limitations of a single world, preparing the way for others who would eventually need to make the same journey. And when the time came for that final exodus, when the current world system collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions, the doors would be ready and the path would be clear. In the end, Roanoke was not a mystery at all. It was a promise that even when one world ends, consciousness finds a way to continue, to grow, and to explore possibilities that have no end. The last thing Ellis saw before the transition was complete was little Virginia Dare, now an adult but still carrying the wisdom of a child, who had never been bound by the limitations others accepted as absolute. She smiled at him and spoke in a voice that echoed across dimensions. "Welcome home," she said. "We've been waiting for you." And in that moment, Ellis understood that the real conspiracy had never been to hide the truth about Roanoke, but to prepare humanity for the day when they would need to follow the colonists' example and step beyond the boundaries of the world they had always known. The door remained open, as it always had. The only question was who would be ready to walk through it when the time came. Envision the Black Ops trucks prowling nighttime highways, the hush of a top-secret hangar, the hum of hidden technology that defies earthly logic. And remember, as you listen, if the truth were truly out there, how far would powerful forces go to bury it, or bury those who discover it? Now, with the stage set, let us commence our journey alongside Jake Mercer, a regular, unassuming truck driver thrown headlong into a world of dark conspiracies and cosmic secrets. Buckle in, keep your headlights on, and prepare to traverse the lonely roads that lead straight into Area 51. Jake Mercer often said he'd seen it all during his years on the road, from giant dust storms in Arizona to sketchy rest stops on the outskirts of big cities. He'd once encountered a bull moose outside Boise that nearly totaled his rig. Another time a hitchhiker claimed to be a time traveller from the year 3010. Nothing shocked him anymore, until the day he was handed a government contract that came with an absurdly high paycheck and an equally absurd set of restrictions. It started on a scorching Wednesday afternoon in Albuquerque. Jake, nursing a cold energy drink, had just finished hauling medical supplies across state lines. While reviewing his next assignment, He noticed it was labelled High Priority Federal Clearance Required. His usual dispatcher, a gruff man named Martin, shrugged helplessly. "I don't know, Jake. They just said you're the driver for this. Pays triple, though. Don't ask me any more." The instructions were bizarre. Pick up a sealed freight container at a secure depot. No questions asked. Do not open or inspect the cargo under any circumstance. Follow the GPS coordinates to a location in the Nevada desert. Deliver by midnight, no exceptions. Speak to nobody about the nature of your load. Jake raised an eyebrow but accepted. Triple pay was triple pay, and there had been times he could barely cover the rig's maintenance. This job might set him up for months. Besides, he'd grown tired of daily monotony. A secret government contract carried a certain forbidden allure. He arrived at the secure depot by late afternoon. Towering barbed wire fences enclosed the yard, guarded by men in unmarked uniforms. A tall officer with the ice-cold eyes verified Jake's ID for an uncomfortably long time. Then, with a curt nod, he directed Jake to back his truck into a loading bay. 4 workers carefully rolled out a large metal container, about 20 feet long, its edges sealed with rivets. It had no markings except a small stenciled code, R51, classified. Jake watched them bolt the container to the truck's chassis. The officer approached again, thrusting a thick envelope into Jake's hands. "Your instructions. Stick to them. No detours. No curiosity. Understood?" Jake nodded. He could practically feel the tension in the air as though crossing some invisible threshold from routine life into the hush of clandestine operations. He hopped into his cab, fired up the engine, and eased away. Part of him expected to see black SUVs trailing him, but the roads around the depot were deserted. The miles slipped by in a haze of desert heat. With each passing hour, the sun dipped lower, painting the horizon a fierce orange, then a soft lavender. By dusk, Jake was coasting along an empty stretch of Nevada highway, the sign reading 75 miles to Groom Lake. He knew that name. It was rumoured to be near Area 51, the site of countless alien conspiracies. He snorted to himself. Aliens, right. Just bored people telling wild stories. Still, the distinct hush out here made him uneasy. Around 8 p.m, his radio crackled to life. "Jake, you out there?" The voice belonged to Maggie Ruiz, one of the nighttime dispatch operators he'd befriended over the years. She was a talkative soul who often kept him company on lonely drives. "Heard you took some big job," Jake hesitated. The instructions had been explicit, speak to nobody, but Maggie wasn't exactly nobody. She was a friend. "Yeah, Mags. Some weird government contract. Pays well, though." "Government, huh? They got you on hush-hush duty." "You could say that," Jake admitted. "Hey, can't chat much, the instructions." "Gotcha," Maggie said, sounding intrigued. "Well, I'll be on the line if you need me. Don't let them spooks get you." She ended the call with a laugh that only half concealed her curiosity. Silence returned, broken only by the whir of tyres on asphalt. Jake's mind drifted. Why all the secrecy? A new weapons system? High-tech gear? It's not your place to ask, he reminded himself. Then, from behind the truck, a faint sound reached his ears, a hollow clang like metal tapping on metal. He tensed. The cargo container was sealed. No reason it should make noise. Could something inside be shifting? He decided to ignore it. For half an hour the clang repeated every few minutes. Then it stopped. Jake's heart, however, continued to pound. He told himself it was just the rig's suspension or cargo settling. But a nagging thought persisted. What if something's alive in there? Night fell fully, and the desert around him turned into an expanse of blackness. With less than 60 miles to go, Jake planned to skip rest stops entirely. The job instructions demanded no stops. Fine by him. But the truck's fuel gauge told a different story. He'd miscalculated. He needed fuel or risked stalling short of the drop-off point. That spelled trouble on all fronts. Checking his map, he spotted a lone truck stop about 10 miles ahead. He considered the risk, but thirst and necessity overrode caution. He pulled in around 9:30 p.m. The place was half lit by flickering neon, a relic of the golden age of roadside diners. Only a couple of vehicles sat in the lot, an old station wagon and a battered pickup. Perfect. Less chance of prying eyes. Jake filled his tank, then stepped inside to pay. An elderly cashier nodded at him, barely curious. But just as Jake reached for his wallet, he felt something slip into his back pocket like a paper note. He whirled, scanning the aisles. He saw no one suspicious, only the old cashier slowly bagging items. Outside in the dim lot, Jake fished out the note. Scrawled in shaky handwriting were the words, "You're delivering more than just cargo. Watch your back." That was it. No signature, no explanation. Adrenaline surged in Jake's veins. Someone at this dusty rest stop recognized him, knew his job, and decided to warn him. He stuffed the note into his pocket, hurried back to his truck, and slammed the door shut. The container sat inert, moonlight reflecting off its metallic surface. "Watch my back," he muttered. "What's going on?" He stared at the container. The clang from earlier echoed in his memory. Curiosity gnawed at him. The contract said not to open the cargo, but the contract also never mentioned risking his life for ignorance. Gritting his teeth, Jake hopped down, grabbed a crowbar from the side compartment, and approached the sealed panel. If the old soldier at the checkpoint found out, Jake would lose his entire paycheck, maybe face legal trouble. But sometimes you have to see for yourself what you're hauling. He slid the crowbar under a seam, testing if the rivets could be pried loose. The metal groaned, then relented. Slowly, Jake lifted the edge, heart thudding with each inch. The interior was dark, but a faint chemical smell wafted out. A sterile tang reminiscent of hospitals. Then in the shadows he saw something that made his blood run cold. A heavy steel pod with a thick glass window. It was empty. Straps hung limp, as if they'd once held something in place. Jake felt the nape of his neck prickle. Something had been in that pod, but it wasn't there now. And that meant only one thing: it was loose, possibly inside the container, possibly outside. A flurry of possibilities seized him. He had to close it and drive, pretend ignorance, or he could investigate. But with each second his safe timeline shrank. The clock was ticking toward midnight. The cargo door he'd pried open wouldn't fully reseal without leaving evidence of tampering. Just then, a metallic clang echoed again from behind him. Jake spun around, crowbar at the ready, but saw nothing except dancing shadows. Fear twisted his gut. He needed to get out of here, ASAP. But how do you run from something unknown? He forced the container door shut as best he could, hopped into the cab and revved the engine. He had about 50 miles left to the coordinate, an unknown something presumably in tow, or on the loose. The note's warning replayed in his head. Danger lurked in the darkness, but he had a job to finish, however insane it was becoming. So Jake pressed the pedal, merging back onto the lonely highway. The thought of Area 51 no longer seemed so silly, because in that instant he knew one truth: this was no ordinary cargo, and he was no longer a simple truck driver. He was a man knee-deep in a conspiracy he couldn't yet fathom. As the highway unfurled beneath his wheels, Jake felt an unfamiliar sense of paranoia creeping in. He kept glancing at his side mirrors, half expecting government vehicles to appear with flashing lights. But the desert remained eerily quiet. He turned on his CB radio, hoping to reach Maggie again, some connection to normalcy. Static hissed, then Maggie's voice cut through. "Jake, that you? I was wondering if you'd gone silent for good." "Maggie," he said, his own voice shaky. "Listen, something's off. This cargo, whatever's inside it might have... I don't know, it's just not right." He hesitated to reveal everything, scanning the empty road ahead. I opened it, found a locked pod. Empty, like it was meant to hold something alive. The line crackled with tension. "Alive? Jake, that's not good. Did you see anything else?" "No, just straps." Then I heard noises, like metal scraping. "Something's loose, Mags. Could be an animal, or..." He couldn't bring himself to say the word alien, but the possibility danced in his thoughts. She inhaled sharply. "This is big. You sure you want to keep going?" Jake's foot pressed on the accelerator. "I've come too far. I've got to finish the drop. Maybe once I'm at the base they'll handle whatever it is. Then I'm done. Paid. Out." "Okay. But keep me updated. I'll see if I can dig up anything on that container code you mentioned, R51. Might be referencing Area 51, or it could be something else. Just be careful." He ended the call feeling slightly better, knowing someone had his back. The desert night pulled him deeper in. A battered sign reading "Restricted access beyond this point" loomed up, complete with additional warnings about lethal force. His GPS insisted he was on course. The drop-off coordinate flickered on the screen, still about 30 miles away. A swirling dust devil crossed the highway, forcing Jake to slow. For a moment he thought he spotted headlights behind him, but when he looked again, they were gone. Another flicker of paranoia. Focus on driving. At the next bend the road became narrower, lined with chain-link fences sporting no trespassing placards. This was definitely a different world, someplace built to discourage visitors. At last, around 11:20 p.m, the GPS beeped. "You have arrived at your destination." He found himself at a tall automated gate. A small speaker next to it crackled. "State your clearance code," a monotone voice demanded. Jake fumbled through the envelope for a badge with a printed code. He read it into the speaker. The gate groaned open. No turning back now. Beyond the gate, wide asphalt fields stretched out, dotted with hangars and low buildings. Dim security lights revealed soldiers patrolling. Jake was directed by glowing cones to an underground entrance, reminiscent of a bunker. The entire operation exuded secrecy, and the air felt thick with tension. A pair of uniformed men flagged him down. One motioned him into a cavernous elevator platform large enough for the truck. As it descended, the walls became concrete. Jake's heart hammered. He was going underground, presumably beneath the base's surface. The platform settled in a subterranean loading area, bright fluorescent lights washing everything in an antiseptic glow. Armed guards approached. One barked, "Power down the truck. Step out with your hands visible." Jake complied, squinting under the stark lights. Another guard used a scanning device over the container's locks. Jake tensed. Would they notice I pried it open? A beep. The guard frowned. "The container's seal is compromised. Sir, did you tamper with this?" Jake's breath caught. He forced an even tone. "No. Must have come loose on the road." The guard stared daggers at him, unconvinced. Before the interrogation could deepen, a tall figure in a crisp suit appeared, a man exuding authority. He wore no name tag, but his demeanour demanded respect. "Take the container," he told the guards. "I'll handle the driver." He turned to Jake, his gaze cold. "I'm Agent Nathan Cole. Follow me. Now." Jake had no choice. Agent Cole led him through a set of steel doors into a windowless corridor that seemed to stretch forever, each side bearing identical sealed rooms. They reached a small antechamber where Cole fixed him with a glare. "You're not to speak of anything you see here. I assume you read your contract?" Jake swallowed, trying to maintain composure. "Yes." "Good, because if you break your silence, we'll know. We always know." Cole paused, as if relishing the intimidation. "You'll wait here until we confirm the cargo. Then you'll be escorted off the premises." Jake gave a stiff nod. The door slammed shut, leaving him in a Spartan waiting area with 2 chairs and a silent guard. Minutes bled into an hour. Jake's mind whirred, replaying the ominous note, the empty pod, the possibility that some creature roamed free. He couldn't just leave. He had to at least see it through, yet now he was stuck, evidently untrusted. Suddenly, a blaring siren echoed down the corridor. The guard stiffened, pressing a finger to his earpiece. Muffled orders came through, another beep, a door slid open, and a frantic voice barked, "We have a breach. Unidentified subject loose in Sector C. Secure all entry points." Jake's eyes widened. Sector C? Is that where they took the container? The guard dashed out, leaving Jake momentarily unguarded. Fear and adrenaline collided. If something truly broke loose, a creature perhaps, this place was about to become a war zone, and Jake had no desire to be trapped in the crossfire. He took a risk, slipping out of the waiting area into the corridor. Sirens kept howling and red emergency lights strobed. He turned a corner, nearly colliding with a cluster of uniformed men sprinting in the opposite direction. They ignored him, focused on the crisis deeper inside the facility. Jake spotted a sign that read, "Warehouse access, authorized personnel only." Heart pounding, he reasoned that was likely where his cargo had been stored. Maybe he could glimpse the truth. Maybe he could find answers, and maybe find an exit, because once the base settled, they'd probably arrest or worse. If I see something incriminating, maybe I can force my release. Steeling his courage, he slipped through the door and descended a short flight of steps. The hallway ended in a large open area that resembled an aircraft hangar, only it was buried underground. Harsh fluorescent lights shone over crates, pods and containers, and near the centre, resting on a heavy-duty dolly, was his container, the side panel still parted from his crowbar attempt. Military personnel crowded around, rifles at the ready. A slender, bespectacled man in a lab coat kneeled by the container, rummaging through what appeared to be alien-like apparatus inside. Jake recognised him from a news article he'd read about government scientists, Dr. Eli Voss. But the man looked older, haunted, his face drawn in panic. Jake crept closer, ducking behind some crates. He glimpsed inside the container, strange devices with glowing lines, a cylindrical capsule that must have once held the occupant of the steel pod. Dr. Voss fiddled with an electronic console as if trying to lock something down. Another soldier shouted, "We have movement in the vents, Sector C!" Chaos reigned. In the swirl of confusion, a shadow flickered across the far wall, tall and spindly, shifting unnaturally quick. Jake's blood chilled. Was that the creature? A guard fired a shot. Shouts erupted. "Hold your fire! We need it alive!" Another soldier scrambled to raise a tranquilizer rifle. Then, to Jake's horror, the shadow vanished from the wall and reappeared on the ceiling, impossibly defying gravity. Staccato gunfire erupted, the muzzle flashes lighting up the space in blinding arcs. Something hissed, a weird, unearthly keening. Then silence, broken by a guard's scream. Jake's instinct screamed at him to run, but his body froze. A part of him was transfixed by the bizarre reality unfolding. Something not of this world scuttled across the ceiling, too fast to track. Soldiers cursed and swung rifles upward. In the chaos, Dr. Voss turned, scanning the room. His eyes locked onto Jake, half hidden behind a crate. In that moment, recognition flickered in the scientist's gaze. Maybe he pegged Jake as a civilian who shouldn't be there. But instead of raising an alarm, Voss mouthed something akin to "Get out!" Jake's heart hammered. Did he dare trust this man? The swirling lights, the shouts, the lurking predator overhead. There was no time to weigh options. Dr. Voss beckoned, then pointed toward a door marked "Exit, Vehicle Hangar." Jake nodded mutely, realizing this might be his only chance to escape. Then, just as he started to move, another ear-shattering alarm blared. The creature hissed again, and the lights flickered, plunging the entire base into partial darkness. Jake felt the temperature in the hangar drop, or perhaps it was just cold sweat dripping down his back. The overhead fluorescent tubes sputtered, struggling to keep the space lit. In that half-lit gloom, shadows sprawled across the walls like living things. The shape of the creature, so swift and unnatural, kept flickering in his peripheral vision. Dr. Eli Voss dashed across the concrete floor, nearly tripping over a supply crate. Jake followed, keeping low. Gunshots echoed again, followed by a soldier's panicked shout. Then a monstrous clang of metal on metal, like something heavy was battered aside. One more shriek cut through the confusion, then silence. The hush was deafening, charged with primal fear. Voss and Jake reached the side door labelled "Exit Vehicle Hangar," but it was locked by an electronic key panel. Cursing under his breath, Voss fumbled for a keycard, swiped it, and the panel beeped red. Access denied. Another attempt, same result. "Damn it!" Voss hissed, his voice quivering. He slapped the panel in frustration. They must have initiated lockdown. I need a higher clearance. He glanced over his shoulder. We'll have to find another way out. Jake's mind reeled. Doc, what the hell is in here? Did something break out of that container? Voss closed his eyes briefly as if in pain. Yes, it's an entity we recovered from a crash site. Part biological, part mechanical, still learning about it, but we call it Xenoform Beta. We had it sedated, locked in stasis, until your container got compromised. He cast Jake a conflicted look, half guilt, half blame. Now it's loose. Jake's stomach clenched. This is insane. Let's just get out. If that thing's... What you're about to hear comes from a classified journal discovered in 1996, 3 years after its author's mysterious death. The journal belonged to Lieutenant Commander Mason Hale, US Navy intelligence officer. What follows is his first-hand account of Operation High Jump and the truth they tried to bury beneath the ice. US Navy Intelligence Division. Classification: Eyes only. Destroyed. Date range: August 1946 to March 1947. Entry 1, August 15th, 1946. USS Pine Island, Norfolk Naval Base. My name is Lieutenant Commander Mason Hale, and if you're reading this, then I'm likely dead and someone has found what I was never supposed to write down. I'm documenting this because the truth has a way of surfacing, even when buried under miles of ice and decades of silence. 3 days ago, I received orders that would change everything I thought I knew about our world. I was to report immediately to Admiral Richard Byrd for a classified briefing regarding Operation High Jump, what the papers are calling the largest Antarctic expedition in history. 13 ships, 4,700 personnel, aircraft carriers, and enough firepower to invade a small country. For a research mission, it seemed remarkably well armed. The briefing room was cold, sterile, and filled with men whose faces I didn't recognise, but whose bearing screamed intelligence community. Admiral Byrd stood at the head of the table, his weathered face grave as he spread aerial photographs across the polished surface. "Gentlemen," Byrd began, his voice carrying the weight of unspoken knowledge, "what I'm about to tell you does not leave this room. Officially, Operation High Jump is a training exercise designed to test personnel and equipment in extreme cold weather conditions. Unofficially, ... He paused, studying each of us in turn. "We're going to Antarctica to determine if we're alone down there." The photographs showed vast expanses of white, but there were anomalies, dark spots that didn't match the terrain, geometric patterns that looked almost artificial. One image showed what appeared to be a metallic object partially buried in snow, its surface reflecting sunlight in a way that seemed wrong, unnatural. These were taken during reconnaissance flights in late 1945, Byrd continued. The Brazilian Navy reported similar sightings off their Antarctic claims, disc-shaped objects moving at impossible speeds, emerging from and disappearing into the ice. We also have reports of unusual magnetic readings and radio interference in specific grid coordinates. A colonel I didn't recognise leaned forward. "Sir, are we talking about the Germans? Everyone knows they had interests in that region." Byrd's expression darkened. "That's what we need to find out. What we do know is that in 1939, Nazi Germany launched an expedition to Queen Maud Land and claimed a territory they called Neuschwabenland. They dropped thousands of metal markers with swastikas marking their claim. The expedition lasted months longer than necessary for simple territorial marking." He pulled out another photograph, this one showing a massive ice formation, with what looked like an entrance carved into its face. This was photographed 6 months ago. Notice the regularity of the opening. Nature doesn't carve perfect rectangles into glaciers, gentlemen. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Admiral, what exactly are we expecting to encounter down there?" Byrd locked eyes with me, and I saw something I'd never seen in a superior officer before. Uncertainty mixed with fear. We weren't going down there to explore, Commander Hale. We were going to see who was already there. Entry 2, September 3rd, 1946. At sea, South Atlantic. The journey south has been uneventful, but the tension among the crew is palpable. Word travels fast on a ship, and despite the classification levels, rumours spread like wildfire. The men know this isn't a standard research mission. You don't bring destroyers and aircraft carriers to study penguin migration patterns. I've been assigned to the intelligence unit aboard the Pine Island, working directly under Admiral Byrd's command. My job is to analyse any findings, compile reports, and maintain communication with Washington. What they didn't tell me is that I'd also be documenting evidence of what might be the most significant discovery in human history, or the most dangerous cover-up. Last night, I had a private conversation with Admiral Byrd on deck. The Southern Cross was brilliant overhead, and the sea was unusually calm. He seemed different away from the briefing rooms and official protocols, more human, more vulnerable. "Commander," he said, lighting his pipe against the wind, "I've been to both poles. I've seen things that don't make it into the official reports. Strange lights in the sky, radio signals from coordinates that should be empty ice, magnetic anomalies that our equipment can't explain." He took a long draw from his pipe. "But this is different. This time, we have evidence." "Evidence of what, sir?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the dark water. 20 years ago, I would have said Germans, secret bases, advanced technology they developed during the war. But the war's been over for a year, and the activity has increased, not decreased. Whatever's down there, it's not abandoned Nazi facilities. Then what? "I don't know, Commander, but I have a feeling we're about to find out." He turned to face me, and in the moonlight his eyes looked haunted. "Keep detailed records of everything we encounter. Everything. Promise me that." I promised, not knowing then how heavy that promise would become. Entry 3, October 12th, 1946. Little America 4, Base, Ross Ice Shelf. We've established our primary base on the Ross Ice Shelf using Admiral Byrd's previous expedition site as a foundation. The scale of this operation is staggering. We have enough supplies and personnel to sustain operations for 8 months, yet we're supposedly here for only 4. The official timeline doesn't match the resources deployed. Strange incidents have begun almost immediately. 2 days after establishing base camp, our radio operators picked up transmissions on frequencies that shouldn't exist. Highly sophisticated encrypted communications using technology more advanced than anything in our arsenal. The signals originate from grid coordinates deep within Queen Maud Land, the area the Germans claimed as Neuschwabenland. Lieutenant Peterson, our chief radio operator, brought me the recordings yesterday. His face was pale, his hands shaking slightly as he handed me the transcripts. "Sir, I've been doing radio work for 15 years. I've never heard encryption like this. It's not just coded, it's using a completely different transmission methodology. And sir, some of it's in German, but not standard German. It's using technical terminology I've never encountered." I listened to the recordings. Most were indecipherable, but occasionally words broke through clearly. One word appeared repeatedly. Base 211. According to our intelligence files, there were rumours during the war that Germany had established a secret base in Antarctica, designated as Base 211. But it was dismissed as propaganda. Apparently we were wrong. Admiral Byrd ordered increased aerial reconnaissance over Queen Maud Land. What our pilots reported back changed everything. Entry 4, October 18th, 1946. Emergency Intelligence Brief. At 0800 hours, Lieutenant Commander Johnson returned from a routine reconnaissance flight over Queen Maud Land with a report that sent shockwaves through our command structure. I'm documenting this immediately while the details are fresh, though I suspect this entry will never see official records. Johnson's voice was steady during the debrief, but I could see the disbelief in his eyes. At approximately 0630, while conducting photographic reconnaissance at 15,000 feet, we observed multiple metallic objects emerging from the ice sheet approximately 200 miles inland from the coast. Admiral Byrd leaned forward. "Describe these objects, Commander." "Disc-shaped, sir. Approximately 50 to 75 feet in diameter based on comparison with surrounding terrain features. They moved unlike any aircraft I've ever seen. No visible propulsion system, no exhaust trails, and they accelerated from stationary to what I estimate was over 1,000 miles per hour in seconds." The briefing room fell silent. Johnson continued, "They appeared to emerge directly from the ice, sir. Not from surface installations, but from beneath the ice sheet itself. We counted 7 objects before they disappeared into low cloud cover." Admiral Byrd studied the photographs Johnson had taken. Even in black and white, the objects were clearly artificial, clearly not of any design in our current arsenal. The surface appeared seamless, almost mirror-like, reflecting the Antarctic landscape with unnatural clarity. "Did they acknowledge your presence, Commander?" Johnson's expression darkened. "Yes, sir. They maintained formation and appeared to pace our aircraft for approximately 3 minutes before accelerating away. It felt like they were studying us, sir. That evening, Admiral Byrd called me into his private quarters. The photographs were spread across his desk, along with intelligence reports I hadn't seen before, some dated back to 1943, describing similar sightings by German U-boat crews in Antarctic waters. "Commander Hale," he said without preamble, "tomorrow we're implementing Project Silent Spear. It's a classified reconnaissance operation targeting the coordinates where these objects were observed. I want you to accompany the strike team as intelligence liaison." "Strike team, sir?" I thought this was reconnaissance. Byrd's expression was grim. "We're going in armed, Commander. Whatever's down there has technology decades ahead of ours, and they're watching us. We need to know their capabilities and intentions before they decide we're a threat." I should have realised then that we weren't the hunters in this scenario. We were about to become the hunted. Entry 5, October 20th, 1946. Grid coordinates 71 degrees south, 10 degrees west. Queen Maud Land. What happened today will haunt me for the rest of my life. I'm writing this by flashlight in the emergency shelter, my hands still shaking from what I witnessed. 3 men are dead, 2 helicopters destroyed, and we barely escaped with evidence that will never see the light of day. Project Silent Spear launched at 0500 hours. Our strike team consisted of 2 helicopters, 12 Marines, and enough firepower to level a small building. The target was a glacial canyon approximately 300 miles inland, where aerial reconnaissance had identified what appeared to be artificial structures beneath the ice. The flight took 2 hours through increasingly unstable weather. Radio communications became erratic as we approached the target coordinates, filled with interference that sounded almost like whispers in unknown languages. Lieutenant Morrison, our pilot, reported multiple instrument malfunctions as we flew deeper into Queen Maud Land. At 0715 hours, we crested a ridge and saw our target. The canyon stretched for miles, its walls perfectly vertical as if carved by machine rather than formed by natural processes. At the canyon floor, approximately 500 feet below us, structures emerged from the ice, geometric, metallic, and clearly artificial. They followed architectural principles I'd never seen, with surfaces that seemed to bend light around them. But it wasn't the structures that stopped our hearts, it was what was emerging from them. 3 disc-shaped objects, each approximately 100 feet in diameter, rose silently from concealed openings in the ice. They moved with impossible grace, defying everything I knew about aerodynamics and physics. The surface of each craft was mirror smooth, reflecting our helicopters with perfect clarity. "Command, this is Silent Spear 1, Morrison radioed back to base. "We have visual confirmation of artificial structures and 3 unidentified aircraft, requesting immediate backup." The response came through heavy static. "Silent Spear 1, proceed with reconnaissance. Document everything." That's when everything went wrong. The lead disc accelerated toward us with terrifying speed. I expected weapons fire, explosions, some form of conventional attack. Instead, a brilliant white beam emanated from the craft's underside, washing over our helicopter in blinding light. Every electrical system failed instantly. Radio, navigation, engine controls, everything died. Morrison fought to maintain control as we began auto-rotating toward the canyon floor, but the helicopter responded like a dead weight. "Mayday! Mayday! We're going down!" Through the chaos, I watched the second helicopter suffer the same fate. The beam hit them, their rotors stopped, and they plummeted into the canyon. I never heard them crash over the sound of our own emergency landing. We hit hard but level, the helicopter's skids digging deep furrows in the snow. Morrison was unconscious, blood streaming from a head wound. Sergeant Williams and 2 Marines were alert but shaken. I grabbed our emergency radio and camera equipment, knowing we might have only minutes before whatever was in those discs decided our fate. That's when I saw one of them up close. The disc settled silently onto the ice approximately 50 yards from our crash site. No landing gear extended, no engines wound down. It simply stopped moving and hovered 3 feet above the ground. The surface was seamless like polished mercury and covered in symbols I'd never seen before. Not German, not any human language I could recognise. The symbols seemed to shift and flow across the surface as I watched, hypnotic and alien. A section of the craft's underside iris opened, not like a door, but like a living membrane. No one emerged, but I felt a presence studying us, evaluating us. The silence was absolute except for the wind across the ice and Morrison's laboured breathing. I raised my camera and managed 3 photographs before Sergeant Williams grabbed my arm. "Sir, we need to move, now." He was right. Whatever intelligence was inside that craft, it had allowed us to survive the crash. That suggested either mercy or curiosity, but I didn't want to test which one would run out first. We improvised a stretcher for Morrison and began moving toward the canyon rim. The discs followed at a distance, maintaining formation like shepherds guiding sheep. They made no threatening moves, but their presence was a constant reminder that we existed at their sufferance. It took 6 hours to reach the canyon rim where emergency crews were waiting. During the entire climb, the discs maintained their escort. Only when we reached safety did they accelerate away, disappearing into the Antarctic sky at speeds that made our best jets look like children's toys. Admiral Byrd was waiting at the rescue site, his face grim as we loaded Morrison into a medical helicopter. As the rescue team worked, he pulled me aside. "What did you see down there, Commander?" I told him everything. The structures, the technology, the way the craft moved and responded. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Did they communicate with you? Any attempt at contact?" "No, sir, but..." I hesitated, unsure how to express what I'd felt. "They weren't hostile, Admiral. They could have killed us easily, but they didn't. It felt more like a warning." Byrd nodded slowly. "A warning. Yes, I think you're right." He looked back toward the canyon, now hidden by distance and weather. "The question is, what are they warning us about?" Entry 6, October 25th, 1946. USS Pine Island Emergency Conference. The past 5 days have been a whirlwind of classified briefings, encrypted communications with Washington, and increasingly desperate attempts to understand what we've encountered. The photographs I took in the canyon have been analysed by our best intelligence officers, and their conclusions are both fascinating and terrifying. The symbols on the craft's surface don't match any known human language or writing system. Linguistic analysis suggests they're not decorative but functional, possibly some form of advanced interface or communication system. The metallic composition appears to be an alloy unknown to our current metallurgy, with properties that shouldn't exist according to our understanding of material science. More disturbing are the intelligence reports that have been flooding in since our encounter. Similar sightings have been reported by naval vessels throughout the Southern Ocean. A destroyer reported contact with a high-speed object that paced them for 30 minutes before disappearing beneath the ice. A submarine crew described sonar contacts moving at speeds impossible for any known underwater vessel. But the most significant development came yesterday when Admiral Byrd received a direct communication from Washington. I wasn't present for the initial briefing, but Byrd's demeanour afterward told me everything I needed to know. We were no longer conducting reconnaissance. We were being recalled. "Commander Hale," Byrd said, calling me into his quarters last night, "I need you to understand something. What we've discovered here will never become public knowledge. The implications are too significant, the potential for panic too great. Sir, with respect, don't the American people have a right to know?" Byrd's laugh was bitter. "Commander, 3 days ago, I received a communication that wasn't sent through any of our normal channels. It appeared on my desk, written in perfect English, with details about our mission that only a handful of people should know." He handed me a single sheet of paper. The message was brief but chilling. "Admiral Byrd, your presence in our territory has been noted. We have no desire for conflict, but continued intrusion will be interpreted as hostile intent. You have 72 hours to withdraw your forces beyond 60 degrees south latitude. This is not a negotiation." The paper felt strange in my hands, not quite like any material I'd handled before, and the text seemed to shimmer slightly in the lamplight. "Who sent this?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "The same intelligence that's been watching us since we arrived. The same intelligence that could have destroyed our helicopters, but chose instead to disable them. They're giving us a chance to leave, Commander. The question is whether we're smart enough to take it. Entry 7, November 2nd, 1946. Final operations meeting. Today, Admiral Byrd made the decision that would define the rest of his career and haunt him until his death. Operation High Jump was being terminated, effective immediately. All personnel would be evacuated within 48 hours, all equipment beyond basic necessities abandoned, and all records of our encounters classified at the highest levels. The official reason given to the press would be unexpected weather conditions and equipment failures. The truth would be buried so deep that even most of the personnel involved would never know what they had really encountered. In our final intelligence briefing, Byrd addressed the core team, 15 men who had seen enough to understand that we weren't alone in the universe, and that we were woefully unprepared for the implications of that reality. "Gentlemen," Byrd began, his voice carrying the weight of defeat, "what we've encountered in Antarctica represents a paradigm shift in human understanding. We have made contact with an intelligence possessing technology decades, possibly centuries ahead of our own. They have demonstrated both their superiority and their restraint." He paused, studying each of us in turn. "We were warned, not just to leave, but never to return. That warning came with an implicit threat that I have no doubt they possess the capability to carry out." Lieutenant Colonel Henderson, who had been sceptical throughout the entire operation, finally spoke up. "Admiral, are we really going to let them dictate terms to the United States Navy?" Byrd's expression was grim. "Colonel, in the past month, we've lost 2 helicopters, 3 men, and a submarine that hasn't been heard from since it went under the ice near their territory. Every encounter has demonstrated that they could destroy our entire task force without significant effort. We're not retreating because we're cowards. We're retreating because we're outgunned." The room fell silent. The reality of our situation was undeniable, but accepting it went against everything we'd been trained to believe about American military superiority. "Sir," I asked, what happens now? Do we just pretend none of this happened?" Byrd walked to the window, staring out at the Antarctic landscape that had changed everything we thought we knew about our world. "Commander, I'm going to tell you something that must never appear in any official record. Before we leave, I'm going to attempt direct communication with their leadership. I need to understand their intentions, their capabilities, and most importantly, their plans for future contact with humanity. Is that wise, sir?" "Probably not, but it's necessary." He turned back to face us. "Whatever's down there has been watching us for longer than we realise. They've demonstrated restraint so far, but that could change if they perceive us as a growing threat. I need to know if coexistence is possible, or if we're looking at an inevitable conflict." None of us spoke. The implications were too vast, too terrifying to process easily. "One more thing," Byrd continued. "Each of you will be required to sign documents stating that you will never discuss what you've seen here. Your families will be told you participated in routine cold weather training exercises. Your service records will reflect nothing unusual about this deployment." He pulled out a stack of papers from his desk. "I know this goes against your principles. It goes against mine too, but the alternative is panic on a scale that could destabilize society itself. How do you tell the world that we've discovered an advanced civilization living beneath the ice, with technology that makes our most advanced weapons look like stone tools?" We signed the documents. What choice did we have? Entry 8, November the 5th, 1946. Personal log, final entry. Today, Admiral Byrd made contact. I wasn't supposed to be present for the communication attempt, but Byrd requested me as a witness. We travelled by helicopter to coordinates that had been transmitted to us through the same mysterious channel as the previous warning. The location was a flat expanse of ice approximately 50 miles from our base, marked only by a perfect circle of disturbed snow. We landed at the circle's edge and waited. The Antarctic wind was unusually calm, creating a silence so complete it felt oppressive. After 20 minutes, 3 disc-shaped craft appeared on the horizon, approaching with their characteristic impossible grace. They settled into a triangular formation around our position, hovering silently 10 feet above the ground. As before, their surfaces were mirror smooth and covered with flowing symbols that seemed to pulse with internal light. Then something unprecedented happened. One of the craft extended what appeared to be a ramp, not mechanical, but formed from the same flowing material as the hull. A figure appeared at the opening. I've struggled for hours to find words to describe what I saw. The being was humanoid in basic structure, but clearly not human. Tall, perhaps 7 feet, with proportions that were almost familiar, but somehow wrong. The skin appeared translucent, with an underlying luminescence that suggested biological processes unlike anything on Earth. The features were angular, refined, with large eyes that held an intelligence both ancient and alien. But what struck me most was the complete absence of hostility. There was curiosity, perhaps mild concern, but no aggression or malice. The being approached Admiral Byrd directly, stopping approximately 10 feet away. When it spoke, the words formed directly in our minds rather than through sound, a form of communication that was simultaneously intimate and unsettling. Admiral Byrd, you have shown wisdom in accepting our warnings. Your species stands at a crossroads of development. The choices made in the coming decades will determine whether contact becomes beneficial or necessary for your survival. Byrd, to his credit, remained composed despite the obvious strain of the encounter. What do you want from us? We want nothing from you. We have observed your species for millennia, watching your development with interest. Your recent mastery of atomic energy has attracted our attention more directly. Such power, in the hands of a species still learning wisdom, represents a threat not only to yourselves, but to the stability of this world. Are you threatening us? We are informing you. Your activities in this region will cease immediately. The knowledge you have gained here will remain contained. In return, we will continue our policy of non-interference in your affairs, for now. The implications were staggering. They had been watching us for thousands of years, and our recent technological advancement had forced them to take a more active role in monitoring our activities. What happens if we refuse? Byrd asked. The being's expression didn't change, but the air around us seemed to grow colder. Your species is young, Admiral. You have not yet learned that there are consequences to actions, boundaries that must not be crossed. We have maintained this world's stability for far longer than your civilization has existed. We will continue to do so, with or without your cooperation. The communication ended abruptly. The being returned to its craft, the ramp dissolved back into the hull, and all 3 discs accelerated into the sky at speeds that defied physics. Byrd was quiet during the flight back to base. Only when we were alone in his quarters did he speak. Commander, I want you to promise me something. If anything happens to me, if I die under suspicious circumstances or disappear, I want you to make sure the truth survives somehow. Not the official truth, but what really happened here. Sir, what are you planning? I'm going to give them what they want. Complete evacuation, total secrecy, and an end to Antarctic operations. But I'm also going to make sure that someone, somewhere, knows what we encountered. Because this won't be the end of it, Commander, this is just the beginning. 3 days later, we left Antarctica. The official report stated that equipment failures and weather conditions had forced an early termination of the mission. Admiral Byrd gave a brief interview to Chilean press on our way home, where he made statements about enemies that could fly from pole to pole in minutes. Statements that were quickly dismissed as metaphorical references to future aviation technology. But I knew better. He was trying to warn the world, in the only way he could, about what was waiting beneath the ice. Final entry, Mason Hale, I'm dying. Cancer, doctors say. Though I suspect it might be related to something I was exposed to during those weeks in Antarctica 47 years ago. I've carried this secret for nearly half a century, watching as the world moved closer to the precipice that entity warned us about. Admiral Byrd died in 1957, and with him went the last official connection to what we discovered. He never spoke publicly about the encounter, but he also never returned to Antarctica despite numerous opportunities. He knew, as I know, that some doors should remain closed. Over the years, I've watched for signs that they're still watching us. UFO sightings, unexplained aerial phenomena, technological advances that seem to leap beyond normal developmental curves. I believe they've been intervening subtly, perhaps preventing us from destroying ourselves before we develop the wisdom to handle our own power. But I also believe that patience is not infinite. Recent events suggest we're approaching another crossroads. The Cold War has ended, but new threats are emerging. Environmental destruction, nuclear proliferation, and a growing instability that suggests we haven't learned the lessons they hoped we would. I've hidden this journal for 47 years, waiting for the right time to reveal the truth. With my death approaching, I realise that time may never come. But perhaps, if this account survives, future generations will be better prepared for what's coming. Because they're still down there, watching, waiting. And the warning they gave Admiral Byrd still stands. There's something under the ice. Something that has been protecting this world far longer than we've existed on it. They gave us a chance to mature, to develop wisdom alongside our technology. Whether we've succeeded or failed remains to be seen. But next time, and there will be a next time, we may not leave. The journal of Lieutenant Commander Mason Hale was discovered in a safety deposit box in Phoenix, Arizona, in 1996, 3 years after his death from cancer. His nephew, David Hale, initially published excerpts online before the entire document mysteriously disappeared from all servers within 48 hours. David Hale himself died in a car accident 2 weeks later. This complete transcription was reconstructed from archived copies found on defunct servers and private hard drives. The authenticity has never been verified, and the US Navy maintains that Operation High Jump was a routine training and research mission that concluded successfully within normal parameters. Admiral Richard E. Byrd's post-expedition interview in Chile, where he spoke of enemies that could fly from pole to pole, remains a matter of public record. His subsequent removal from Antarctic operations and his reluctance to discuss the mission in detail has never been officially explained. Antarctica remains under international treaty, with military activities strictly prohibited. No nation has attempted another operation of high jump scale in the region where Lieutenant Commander Hale reported his encounters. The truth, as always, remains buried beneath the ice. Our story begins in the hush of classified hallways, where a program reminiscent of the real-life MK Ultra is in full clandestine swing. The term MK Ultra once dominated whispered conversations about CIA-led experiments in mind control during the 1950s through the 1970s. LSD, hypnosis, electroshock therapy. All these manipulations found their ominous place under the banner of national security. In that era, certain individuals were treated less like humans and more like lab specimens, subjected to psychological torment to test the boundaries of the human mind. In this retelling, you'll meet Dr. Elliot Voss, a brilliant neuroscientist initially enamoured with the idea of unlocking the brain's hidden capabilities. But once he steps into the labyrinthine research facility, known only as Project Echo, the illusions of noble science start to crumble. He sees sedation wards where detainees mumble to themselves, the aftermath of near-endless LSD runs, the blank stares of men and women forcibly parted from their own memories. Realising that the line between experiment and torture has been crossed, Voss chooses the perilous path of quiet rebellion. His antagonist, Agent Monroe Thatch, the stoic operative tasked with ensuring Project Echo remains undisturbed. Thatch views the program as a necessary evil in the arms race for psychological supremacy, and he's willing to bury any traitor who jeopardizes it. Meanwhile, among the catatonic subjects is Mara, once a sharp-witted journalist, now a disoriented test subject fighting to piece her identity back together. With Voss's help, she might just reclaim her mind and bring the truth to light. Across 5 parts, we'll trace how Voss moves from compliance to conscience, from naive fascination to outraged horror. We'll witness him sabotage experiments, forge documents, and orchestrate escapes. But each step he takes invites deeper suspicion from the Watchers who guard Project Echo's secrets. At stake is not just his life, but the remnants of Mara's stolen memories and the fates of countless unnamed victims. Ultimately, Voss stands at the crossroads: vanish into the shadows forever, or blow the whistle on an atrocity that has no place in any civilization. Both choices carry lethal risks, so settle in with your blankets and your cautious curiosity. We're about to peel back the layers of a conspiracy that merges technology, psychology, and a ruthless government's quest for absolute control. May this story remind you that even in the darkest corners, a glimmer of empathy can ignite and transform. Grab a late-night snack or a soothing tea, and let's open the locked doors behind which Project Echo lurks. Dr. Elliot Voss first glimpsed the Project Echo compound on a drizzly autumn morning. He'd been flown in on a battered twin-prop plane, landing at a disused airstrip far from any major city. A black sedan awaited him, its driver silent as he whisked Voss down roads so winding that even the day's faint sunlight seemed lost. At last, the car halted before a nondescript concrete building fenced by barbed wire, security cameras angled on every approach. A discreet sign read, Department of Psychological Research, Federal Program 17. But the rumour mill called it something else. A black site where boundaries of science and morality dissolved in the name of defence. Once inside, Voss was greeted by a perfunctory handshake from Agent Monroe Thatch, an older man with close-cropped grey hair and a near-permanent scowl. "Welcome to Echo," he said, voice devoid of warmth. "Your credentials speak volumes, Doctor. We trust you'll find your calling here." Voss forced a polite nod. Months earlier, he'd been approached by government contacts praising his neurology research, claiming they needed innovative strategies for advanced interrogation and memory therapy. Even then, he'd sensed the undercurrent of something sinister, yet his curiosity and a sense of patriotic duty had led him to accept. Perhaps too eagerly, he now thought. They stepped into an elevator that sank deep underground, well below the building's official levels. The corridor that welcomed them looked more hospital than dungeon. Sterilised floors, white walls, overhead fluorescents humming. But as they proceeded, Voss spotted armed guards at certain doorways, and the tension in the air was palpable. Thatch introduced him to a small cluster of lab-coated staff, who each nodded in clipped greetings. The orientation took the form of a restricted briefing. Project Echo was studying the interface between psychoactive substances and forced conditioning techniques. On the surface, they used the language of legitimate research, personality reformation, deep memory reprogramming. But as Voss scanned the faces of these staffers, he saw flickers of discomfort in some, while others seemed unnervingly at ease with such manipulations. Agents in suits hovered at the edges, ensuring no one forgot that everything was both top secret and mandatory. Before long, Thatch ushered Voss into a conference room. A dull projector displayed slides, images of men in straitjackets, eyes wide with confusion, graphs charting sedation levels for cooperative compliance. This was the first explicit hint that the subjects here were not volunteers. "We have various populations," Thatch said matter-of-factly. "Some from prisons, some who can't be officially recognised as detainees, subversives, potential traitors, or undesirables. We measure responses to LSD variants, isolation stints, hypnotic triggers." Each phrase rang alarm bells in Voss's conscience. Voss tried to keep his expression neutral. "And my role?" he asked. "How do I fit into the existing protocols?" Thatch tapped the slides. "We need your expertise to refine the memory disruption procedures. Our prior staff had trouble achieving stable amnesia in certain subjects. We want them to forget everything or reshape their personalities entirely. You are, from your academic work, well versed in neural plasticity, yes?" Swallowing a surge of unease, Voss nodded. Indeed, he'd studied how neural pathways could be altered or overwritten, but never had he imagined applying this knowledge in forced experiments. He recalled the hopeful dream he once held, curing PTSD or reversing degenerative conditions. This was the polar opposite, weaponizing the brain's malleability. After the briefing, a short tour followed. Thatch escorted him through labyrinthine halls where observation windows peered into small windowless rooms. In one, a woman lay strapped to a table, an IV drip in her arm. "She's on the new LSD compound," a passing technician murmured. "Round-the-clock infusion for 3 days now. We're observing the break in her sense of time." Voss's stomach churned. The woman's vacant gaze signalled mental devastation. Indeed, her identity, her sense of reality, was being shredded systematically. They continued to a sealed chamber. Through the one-way glass, Voss saw a figure in a corner, rocking back and forth, muttering a phrase. A guard whispered that this man repeated the phrase, "I am safe, I am safe," for 72 hours under forced wakefulness. The staff measured at which point the mind caved. Voss felt his hand tremble on the doorknob. This was beyond any ethical boundary he knew. The final stop was a small lab assigned to Voss. Tidy. State-of-the-art machinery for EEG scans, chemical mixers and sedation equipment lined the counters. "Your workspace," Thatch said. "You'll liaise with lead researcher Dr. Klein on the next steps. Our aim, refine memory erasures so the subject retains basic function but loses prior allegiances. Field-operable assets, so to speak." He gave Voss a near smile, vile in its sincerity. After Thatch left, Voss sank into the lone office chair. He exhaled shakily. This was a realm of nightmares turned real, the hushed side of psyops he'd only read about in declassified rumours. Could he back out now? The door to the corridor was locked from the outside. Even if it wasn't, the entire facility was under watch. He was effectively a captive too, albeit a well-treated one. In that moment, part of Voss wanted to sabotage everything. Another part rationalised. If he left, they'd find a less scrupulous doctor. He might at least mitigate harm from within. Thus, he resolved to remain, observe carefully and decide how to protect these victims, if possible. He sensed that playing along for now was the only immediate recourse, but his heart hammered with the realisation that each day in Project Echo threatened to stain his conscience forever. Thus began his first evening. After an oppressive dinner in a staff cafeteria where conversation was stifled by suspicion, Voss retired to a Spartan dorm room. He stared at the overhead light, mind replaying the images of hollow-eyed subjects. He opened a small notebook, writing, "Day 1 at Echo. Real, or is it a waking nightmare?" He paused, pen trembling, then added, "I must help them. I can't be complicit in this horror." The vow took shape in those lines. A vow that would soon pit him against the entire apparatus, and dangerously close to losing his own mind in the process. Over the ensuing weeks, Dr. Elliot Voss settled into a grim routine. By day, he wore a veneer of compliance. He joined team meetings, contributed to progress updates, and delivered mild improvements to the sedation protocols. By evening, he returned to his dorm, scrawling private notes in code about each subject he encountered. He'd never explicitly told himself he was building evidence for a leak, yet the thought loomed. If any chance arose to blow the whistle, these notes and data might be invaluable. One of the earliest glimpses of his moral rebellion emerged in the sedation labs. He discovered that a single LSD variant caused catastrophic neural collapse in half the test subjects. The lead researcher, Dr. Klein, considered that a necessary risk, but Voss quietly replaced that batch with a milder compound during an overnight supply swap. The next day's tests yielded lower compliance rates, incensing Klein, but no catastrophic breakdowns. The staff remained puzzled, blaming supply chain inconsistencies. Meanwhile, a cluster of subjects escaped the worst of LSD's ravaging effect. This small subversion boosted Voss's resolve. If he could keep individuals alive, or at least less harmed, he'd salvage a shred of decency. Soon, he seized further chances. In the psychological reprogramming ward, the official logs demanded daily electroshock of certain subjects to keep them pliant. Voss tampered with the voltage calibrations in the machines. The staff, trusting the readouts, believed they were delivering the full jolt, but in reality the shock was far lower. Enough for the outward show, but sparing vital neural tissue. Some subjects began to regain flickers of their personalities, though the guards or lesser staff seldom noticed these subtle awakenings. Yet each small act risked detection. Agent Monroe Thatch remained vigilant. He frequently examined lab results, noticing anomalies. Hard-coded instructions from the top required consistent escalation of dose, yet Voss's logs sometimes reported plateau or slight reduction. Thatch confronted him once, an intense stare across Voss's desk. "Why are your sedation numbers not matching the forecast curves?" Voss feigned confusion. "The subjects show sensitivity. Pushing them further could cause organ failure. We need them stable, not comatose, for accurate data." Thatch's eyes narrowed. "Proceed carefully, Doctor. We can't have emotional squeamishness hamper results. The program demands unwavering commitment." At night, Voss's nightmares grew. He saw faces of the men and women trapped in the wards, calling out for help in twisted illusions. The next day he would pass them in hallways, or watch from the observation deck while they were forced through group suggestion experiments. Some faintly recognized him as a kinder presence, though fear kept them from speaking. In that swirl of oppression, one subject emerged who stirred Voss's determination to new heights. Subject number 23, Mara. She'd been a journalist, rumoured to have pried too deeply into rumoured CIA black sites. Kidnapped from her apartment, she ended up in Echo. Initially sedated to the brink of catatonia, she now hovered in a half-lucid state, memories fraying at the edges. The logs indicated repeated LSD trials, amnestic injections, and forced re-education sessions. One afternoon, while scanning her EEG patterns, Voss recognised signs of partial memory recall. He discreetly adjusted her medication, lowering the sedation so she might piece together her identity. Over the next few days, Mara began to speak in hushed fragments. "They took me. I was investigating. Hush, hush." She'd blink, tears sliding down her cheeks. Voss murmured calm reassurances, feigning routine checks whenever staff were near. But in whispered intervals he told her, "You're not crazy. You were a journalist. They want you silent." She stared wide-eyed, a glimmer of trust in him forming. Around that time, Voss orchestrated his first genuine escape for a group of 3. They were lesser-known detainees, men rumoured to be either drifters or misidentified suspects. Official logs had them listed as unresponsive, terminated. In reality, Voss manipulated the monthly disposal protocol used for expired subjects. He bribed a facility ambulance driver, forging documents that indicated the men's bodies needed to be incinerated off-site. The driver, half sympathetic, half eager for the hush money, smuggled them out alive, releasing them near a safe contact in a neighbouring state. The official story read, 3 deceased, remains destroyed. None in the facility questioned it, as the program's culture was that death often came with high-intensity testing. Days later, Voss glimpsed a brief mention in an underground newsletter about 2 men claiming to have escaped a mind-controlled black site. The reference was oblique, overshadowed by bigger news, but it confirmed the men had survived. The satisfaction balanced the daily dread. He was making a difference. Inevitably, suspicious details mounted. Thatch compiled a list of oddities, sedation logs not aligning with standard progression, and apparent sabotage of LSD supplies, puzzling anomalies in electroshock calibrations. He confronted Dr. Klein, who shrugged and pinned blame on incompetent lab techs. Thatch, unconvinced, began monitoring the labs more closely. Surveillance cameras were installed in corridors where previously only guards roamed. The staff's tension soared. People whispered about a traitor in the ranks. Mara's partial awakening threatened to accelerate that tension. She recalled scattered details. I wrote about covert experiments. I found leads. Then they came. She became convinced she had evidence locked away in some safe deposit box. If only she could get out, contact her old editor. Voss realised that if they freed Mara and she reconnected with her network, the entire Echo operation could be exposed. He urged caution, but the time might come for a major leak. He began compiling more thorough evidence, tapes of sessions, chemical batch numbers, statements from staff. This was no longer small sabotage. It was heading for an all-out revelation, if they pulled it off. But the noose tightened. One evening, a junior staffer who'd glimpsed Voss's tampered logs confronted him quietly. "Doctor, I know you're altering the dosage records. If they discover it, we're done. I can't lose my job." Fear emanated from the staffer's eyes. Voss tried to reassure him, claiming it was only calibrations to ensure stable data. The staffer seemed partly convinced, yet the whisper that a traitor existed was out. Faced with the inevitability that Thatch would soon piece it all together, Voss concluded they had to act soon. He told Mara, "When I trigger your final sedation test tomorrow, it'll be a ruse. We'll fake your body as deceased. If all goes well, I'll place you on the same disposal run that I used before. You must get out, find a journalist or save contact, and blow the lid off Project Echo. That's the only way to stop them from hunting me or recapturing you." Mara, trembling, agreed. Her memories, though incomplete, burned with enough clarity to know that once outside she could expose everything, including the role of powerful officials. Thus the quiet revolt escalated into a plan for a full-blown leak. Voss spent a sleepless night forging documents, labelling Mara's condition as terminal adverse LSD reaction. A single slip, a single suspicious guard, and it would fail. He prayed that luck or justice would be on their side. The next day, under the fluorescent hum of the sedation ward, he prepared the final dose for Mara. If all went to plan, it would appear lethal to those who glanced at the monitors. If not, they'd both pay with their lives. The morning air in the sedation ward felt stale, as if all the walls exhaled dread. Dr. Elliot Voss had planned Mara's final sedation meticulously. He'd prepared a specialised injection that would mimic the vital signs of death for about an hour, just enough time for her to pass official checks. He also had the help of a sympathetic nurse, quietly convinced these subjects were being tortured rather than treated. The nurse would sign the forged death certificate, then assist in transferring Mara to the disposal route. Agent Monroe Thatch, always on the prowl, decided to personally oversee the sedation ward's operations that day. Perhaps the intensifying rumours spurred him to watch for sabotage. At 8 a.m. he strode in, nodding curtly at staff. Voss's pulse pounded. If Thatch insisted on verifying each injection or examining the body, the entire plan might collapse. In a stroke of fortune, a separate incident across the facility demanded Thatcher's immediate attention. A subject in the LSD reconditioning chamber had violently lashed out, injuring a technician. Alarms blared. Thatch barked an apology to Voss. "Carry on without me," then rushed off. Voss allowed himself a momentary breath of relief. With the path cleared, Voss proceeded. He found Mara lying on a gurney in a semi-daze, the sedation regimen intentionally minimal these past few days. She locked eyes with him, and in that silent exchange he sensed her fear and determination. "This is it," he whispered. "Once the injection takes hold, you'll appear in a comatose or near-death state. The nurse will record your final breath." Mara nodded, voice shaky. "What if I don't wake up? Or if they discover the ruse?" Voss swallowed. "We have no alternative. Trust me." He administered the injection, then monitored her vitals. Within minutes, Mara's heartbeat slowed to an almost imperceptible rate, her respiration dropping to faint levels. She looked disturbingly lifeless, though a doctor examining closely might sense the subtle difference. The nurse hovered by Voss's side, forging the official time of death. "Deceased, subject number 23, LSD-induced catatonia and systemic shock," the chart read. Mara was wheeled to the body disposal unit, a euphemism for the corridor leading to the incinerator. There, a gurney waited to be rolled inside. The staff who typically oversaw this station were accustomed to treating each body as just another casualty in the program's pursuit of progress. Voss told them, "She's gone. The logs are signed." They glanced at the form, nodded. No further questions. It stung him that human life had become so trivial here. But in their numb acceptance lay an advantage. None suspected deception. A short while later, a security alarm beeped at the disposal gate. An ambulance was inbound to handle off-site incineration for multiple bodies that had piled up. One of them was Mara. This was the route Voss had used before to free detainees. He parted from the nurse with a subtle nod, hoping to see Mara again, but uncertain. The plan demanded that once out, she find the safe contact, blow the whistle, and vanish. Voss felt both terror and hope swirling in his chest as the ambulance rolled out of the facility gates. But fate had a twist. Within an hour, Agent Thatch returned to Voss's lab. The earlier incident was resolved, yet Thatch's mood bristled with suspicion. He asked, "So, Doctor?" "Voss, I see you had a death this morning. Another LSD complication?" Voss feigned sorrow. "Yes, subject number 23. She'd been on advanced trials." The data spiked unpredictably. She passed quickly. Thatcher's gaze drilled into him. "I find it odd. 23 was stable just days ago with talk of new protocols. What changed so drastically?" A wave of anxiety threatened Voss's composure. The final LSD variant proved lethal in her case. "I regret we couldn't intervene. She collapsed swiftly." He managed to keep his voice steady, though Thatcher's posture indicated mistrust. "Show me the logs. All details," Thatch demanded. Together they pored over the sedation records, ECG readouts, all forged or manipulated by Voss.